Can't underestimate the challenges of this moment.
Let's get more now with Aaron Zellin, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. We heard there from the Secretary of State, and we also know, he's made this direct contact with the HTS rebels. What do you make of the fact that there's some direct line of communication now?
It's not super surprising because the U.S. wants to have a key role in this transition. We should also remember that just yesterday, HTS handed over an American that was found in one of the Assad regime's prisons, Travis Timmerman, to American soldiers based in eastern Syria. So it's possible that that also could have opened up some communication as well.
But is it normal for the U.S. to have a direct line with a group that it still does consider to be a terror organization?
Not traditionally. However, the Syrian Democratic Forces that the U.S. is working to fight against the Islamic State, members of that group have been affiliated with the PKK, which is also a foreign terrorist organization. So it is awkward, but because of the current situation, it's the reality.
Do you anticipate the U.S. maybe making some moves to try to take this group off that list?
I don't think we'll see anything in the near term. I think that the U.S. wants to see a number of moves that HTS might make vis-a-vis fighting ISIS, the chemical weapons that remain in Syria, the foreign fighters that are in his mix, as well as making sure that, after this transition, there's an inclusive government that includes minorities and women as well, and not sectarian in nature. So I think it's a wait and see approach, but they've laid down in the United States sort of a gauntlet on what they could, happen if HTS follows through on some of these guidelines.
Yeah, there's this kind of list of guidelines, isn't there, that Secretary Blinken's been pretty clear about in terms of what he wants to see from a new Syrian government: respect for minorities, rejecting extremism. How much influence do you think the U.S. might actually be able to have on the way Syria develops its next government in the future?
I think a lot of it will depend on sort of gestures or signaling that's given by HTS that are positive. And then the U.S. does the same thing, and it sort of creates a virtuous circle. I think HTS, giving the American journalists back to the U.S. without trying to barter or do any prisoner exchanges, as we've seen with other adversaries in the past, like the Taliban, for example, I think is a good sign that they're trying to show that, we want to work with you. Obviously, there are a lot of complications and there's a lot of history behind this. I mean, this is very much unprecedented. But I think when we're thinking about the future of Syria and the Syrian people itself, it's important to remember that they just suffered under 50 years of totalitarianism. So it's not an easy issue in many respects.
Yeah, and Aaron, there are other players obviously in the region. Turkey, just nearby. How big of a role do you think that country is going to play going forward, given that it did support the offensive which was led by HTS?
They definitely will have a role. So will other countries as well. I think one of the key things that happened today in the meeting in Aqaba, Jordan, was bringing together all of the U.S. allies in one spot so that there could be one voice in dealing with this transition. Because if there's many different voices, it could create confusion or chaos, or backing of different people against one another, as we've maybe seen in other contexts. So I think that this is an important first step from the international community's perspective, so that, when discussing with HTS and trying to shape things in the way that could be beneficial to all Syrians, it's good to have one voice together.
How high do you think on the agenda of the U.S. and its partners is ISIS and the chances that it could reestablish itself amid the chaos taking place there in Syria?
It's definitely a continued issue. We've seen that the Islamic State has had an uptick in the number of attacks this year compared to last year. It's, of course, nowhere near as much as that we saw, 5 to 10 years ago. But if anything destabilizes in the East, it definitely could create a lot more problems, because it's important to remember that there continues to be 10,000 male ISIS prisoners held by the Syrian Democratic Forces.
Aaron Zellin, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you as always.
Thank you.